Here's a fun drinking game for everyone watching at home if you're interested. Take a shot every time I mispronounce something. I know for a fact that at least one of you is going to give me shit for how I pronounce certain words and names and song titles, so fuck it. Why don't we jump ahead of the curve and turn it into a little game? Twilight of Codependent Love is the 7th studio album from Icelandic metal crew Sólstafir, who've been kicking around and releasing music for just about 25 years now. Initially known for having a very raw and aggressive take on European black metal, the band has since evolved into a much more experimental and atmospheric metal band, existing now primarily within the realms of post-rock and post-metal, with additional influences from the realms of traditional European and Icelandic folk music and alternative rock, the latter of which appearing to be so prominent on this particular album that we even have a visual homage to Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness from the Smashing Pumpkins on the album cover. And no, that's not me insinuating or implying anything. Solstafir even admits to this themselves. More importantly, though, I feel as if Endless Twilight of Codependent Love shows Solstafir at one of their most emotionally diverse and flexible points in a while. Simply calling this emotive would be one hell of a fucking understatement. Solstafir sound absolutely anguished and tormented on this thing. The songs are consistently very powerful, very stark, very melancholic, with lush keyboards and string instruments and some howled, crackling vocals and some very sensitive and insecure spoken word pieces at times. There is static and fuzz and feedback ringing off of the guitars and the bass. And the whole thing just feels as if it's shrouded in some kind of thick, dense fog or mist or some kind of aromatic smoke. You can feel real misery, and you can feel Solstafir trying to cut through that misery with some of their music, or at the very least trying to cope with some of that misery with their music. And while it may indeed be a sheer coincidence that this album is arriving in such a confusing and divisive time, it does nonetheless influence the overall tone and outcome of the record, making for perhaps one of the most emotionally vulnerable and even realistic albums that the band have ever put out. Take, for instance, the track Roker, which opens on an absolutely stunning orchestral arrangement. It's very lush, very organic, very powerful as a result. You can practically feel the cool Icelandic winds flowing through your hair as it goes on. From there on, though, transitioning into some very unorthodox and genuinely anguished psychedelic rock, with a lot of airy keyboards and guitar chords, a lot of spacey and genuinely even slimy bass grooves diving in and out of the forefront of the sound, with an especially anguished vocal performance as well, as lead singer Addy appears to ramble and mumble to himself, growing more and more confused and frustrated as the track goes on. Now, for the record, I really don't know exactly what this song is talking about since the lyrics aren't in English, but it really does feel as if the band is sonically going through some kind of mental breakdown here, or at the very least on the verge of it. And strikingly similarly, the following track, Her Fall from Grace, does tap directly into that aforementioned mental breakdown, emphasized with very somber and minimalistic songwriting that gives Addy the necessary room to fully express his pain vocally, to fully express that misery, that suffering, that heartache. His voice may not be especially polished per se. He does have trouble hitting and maintaining certain notes and pitches, not just on this song, but also across the album. But what he lacks in strictly technical ability, he makes up for in humanity. He feels so fucking genuine here. I feel as if he's in the room with me when he's singing this. Like I could just pass him a box of tissues, pat him on the back, and tell him everything's gonna be okay. And the same can honestly be said about a lot of the tracks here. Take, for instance, the track Till Mordar, which goes for a much more spacey and direct kind of new prog sound, almost feeling like a long-lost Anathema demo. Or, for instance, the track Or, which initially weirdly but ultimately comfortably manages to incorporate an almost jazz-like elegance into the very fuzzy and emotive post-rock. Or on the track Dionysus, where the band re-embraced some of their earliest influences from heavy metal and black metal, with scorching, blistering black metal musicianship and perhaps the most aggressive and violent vocal performance on the album. Now, unfortunately, there are some issues regarding the actual flow of the album itself, namely how certain pieces of certain songs are sometimes in direct combat with other pieces of other songs. This is an especially huge problem on opening track Akiri, where we are constantly bouncing back and forth between some minimalistic and spacey post-rock, some ferocious and oddly punky black metal, before ending on a very strange burst of high-spirited classic rock influence, complete with like straight-up Mississippi Queen-style cowbell. If we were dealing with a band like Kvelertak, maybe there'd be a way to bring this all together into something a little bit more cohesive, but in the hands of Solstafir, it feels sloppy and just starts the album on such an awkward and clumsy note. I also think that in the album's most inherently metal moments, it is a little bit too chaotic, explosive, and noisy for its own good. I found the audio clipping a lot on the track Dionysus in particular, especially on higher volumes. But all things considered, I won't argue with the emotional core or atmosphere of the album itself, because that is where Solstafir consistently and overwhelmingly succeed on this thing. I'm going to give this thing a very, 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 very enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5. Like, we are so dangerously close to a 4 out of 5. It is almost offensive for me to not give this thing a 4 out of 5. But I have to remain somewhat objective. I have to keep in mind my concerns with some of the songcraft, with the opening track in particular, with the sound mix, hence the 3.5 out of 5, but again, a super fucking crazy enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5, particularly if you've just been looking for something really emotional for you to just lose yourself into. I can picture this being an extremely cathartic listen for some people, particularly those who are dealing with mental illness or who know people who are dealing with mental illness. I think Solstafir fans are going to be delighted as well, particularly if you've been enjoying the last couple of records. And I would even recommend this to some more casual rock listeners as well, because I think an album like this does a great job at showing the emotional capabilities of heavy music without alienating or outright confusing anybody. Well, maybe excluding the vocals. I think the actual technique could prove to be very love or hate, shall we say. I thoroughly enjoyed this thing regardless. I'm even considering picking this up on vinyl should I ever be able to go to a record store in Ontario ever again. Oh my god, we're getting like 1,000 cases of COVID-19 every day. Fucking good job, Ontario. Highly recommended. Definitely check this out. 3.5 out of 5. Once again, literally the most enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5 I could possibly give without altering the score further. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately, and you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.